with such busy lives. We've got, lots of commitments. We don't give ourselves that time and that space just to reflect and think back, what it is, I'm actually looking to achieve. And also sometimes there's a fear factor as well, I don't know how would I possibly change, how could I possibly transition? And it's kind of fear of the unknown. But what I do with clients is it's giving them a structured space, a non-judgmental way to really think and reflect about what it is they want to do and how they can achieve it.
Welcome to the L&D Podcast with your host, Nick Day of JGA Recruitment, specialist HR recruiters. This podcast is sponsored by Think Learning, specialists in learning and performance technologies. Visit thinklearning.com to find out more.
Hello and welcome to the HR L&D Podcast. My name is Nick Day from James Gray Associates. We are specialist HR recruiters, and today I am joined by Joanna Vinacour, who is a qualified and experienced HR professional with over 19 years HR and L&D expertise. However, Joanna is not just an HR expert, she's also a qualified career coach. So we've got two for the price of one on this podcast today. Her background to date has enabled her to specialise in a wide variety of areas, including internal recruitment, so something I'm obviously passionate about myself, employee development, employee well-being, staff engagement, mediation, and of course, coaching line managers in people management best practices, psychometric testing, design and training and career coaching. Now, recently, as I mentioned, Joanna qualified as a career coaching professional, and she's now using this expertise to help individuals to make informed career-related decisions through tailored practical sessions that can range from discussing making a career transition to how people can return to work after a long career break. If you're interested in finding out more about her career coaching services, then of course I will be putting a link in the episode notes to her website, but I'll mention it now if you want to log in and follow along. Website is www.jvcareercoach.co.uk, and as I mentioned, that will be in the episode notes as well. Now, Joanna is passionate about guiding people to make informed and exciting career-related choices, and her own career path of working across public sector, retail, charitable and financial services has enabled Joanna to inform people from all different sectors across a range of HR and recruitment-related issues. As well as training through the Career Counselling Service, Joanna's qualifications include a BSc in Psychology, a postgraduate diploma in HR Management, and she's also a qualified Thomas International practitioner in psychometric testing. So a wealth of experience, a wealth of expertise. I'm delighted to welcome Joanna to the HR L&D Podcast. So, Joanna, welcome. How are you feeling this morning?
Yeah, I'm feeling really excited, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Thank you. Lovely to join you here.
You're welcome. It's great to have someone who can offer us two different streams. You've got the career coaching arm and the HR L&D arm, and I'm definitely going to be asking you many questions about both sides.
L&D Podcast Discovery, questions to set the scene.
So before we crack into the detail, I wondered, Joanna, if you could just give the listeners a little bit of an insight into your career journey to date. Obviously, I mentioned in the introduction, you've got 19 years expertise in HR in total, but I wanted to just find out a bit more about what's led you to starting in HR all the way through to joining me today on this HR L&D podcast.
So yeah, it started all bizarrely when I actually took my own career choice test when I was at sixth form at school. And although I didn't realise it until now, this actually had a profound effect on me. So the results came in when I was 18. It said, I should go off and study psychology at university. And that was absolutely fine. So and that's what I wanted to do. So I was really keen and had no idea what I was going to do afterwards, but that's what I went and did. After graduating, I then decided that I really wanted to work in the charity sector. And so I worked in social work for a couple of years, working with over 65s. And then I also spent a year with the mental health team. And whilst working social work, I actually became a union rep for an individual, and it was at that point I discovered all about HR. So I thought, why not give this a go? And I went and spoke to the people in the HR team and found out all about what they did, and I really liked the sound of it. So that's when I decided to transition across into HR at that point. So my first ever HR role was working for Barnet Council. It was there for a few years, and then I went on to work as HR officer for Sainsbury's. And whilst I was there for quite a few years, about 11 years. I was involved with internal comms. I was an environment champion for a while. I was also an L&D specialist. So I had, different roles, and that gave me a lot of experience in terms of, because it's such a large company, working in different areas within HR. Whilst I was there, I completed my, as you mentioned earlier, my postgraduate diploma in human resource management, which was excellent training for me. And then after that, decided I really needed a change. So I went and worked as an HR advisor for an organisation called Hearts Near Leisure, as a generalist role, but, involved in all employee relations, training for managers, mediations, and that was really exciting, that role. And then that led me to decided I needed another change, working in my current role as HR officer for a company called COFAS, which provide credit insurance. I wanted to be part of an HR team again. As in my previous role, it was a standalone role, but this one I enjoyed being part of a team. And again, it's a lot of employee relations, internal recruitment, psychometric testing, looking at team development and how we can develop the teams, and also looking at development plans as well, and making sure that we've got solid development in place, and all the behind the scenes that goes with the training as well. And then last year, bizarrely, I actually found my old career report from sixth form, and I thought I'll have a read through just as a joke, just as a bit of fun. And it actually stated on there that one of the reasons why I chose psychology was the potential of going into HR, although I'd completely forgotten I'd ever written that until last year. So it was just strange how, coming back to that, it kind of almost full circle. And also it occurred to me when I was reading this report that, I really didn't have the best career advice when I was at school or at university. Didn't really, I kind of fell into HR really, although I'm thankful I did. But it kind of made me really think about, that I could help other people in exploring their careers, no matter what stages they are in their life. And that's kind of what led me into career coaching as well. So, last year I decided to embark on becoming a career coach and qualifying, and now setting up my own practice. So, it's really exciting times.
Fantastic. What a great 360 story, as you said, to read back and realise that actually that's the journey you've taken, albeit you weren't necessarily guided as well as you could have been, and hence you've taken on that journey now. What a fantastic story. And also, you've also got experience in such wide sectors, to go from public sector into sort of large business like Sainsbury's, a household brand name, then into not-for-profit, then into financial services. That must give you a real wealth of experience in working with very, very different sectors, some very, very bureaucratic. Some obviously I'm assuming will give you a little bit more autonomy, some perhaps limited slightly in their funding. How have you found those changes? Has it been difficult for you to adopt, sort of jumping from one sector to another, or what have been the exciting intricacies of each?
They've all had, funnily enough, I was thinking about this a few months ago, they all have, wherever you go, I've found that there always seems to be like lots of similarities in terms of HR issues, wherever you go. Which has lent itself well in terms of, the training that I had at the beginning. So what I suppose is different is kind of like the policies and procedures and the culture of the organisation. And once you get used to that, and once you understand that and the ways that the organisation wants to work, it's just a matter of adapting. So, but I think fundamentally there's always, thinking back throughout my career, there's always kind of been employee engagement. It was always really big when I worked at Sainsbury's, for example.
I think it opens up an interesting question, because as a recruiter, and obviously I know that you're quite passionate, particularly on career advice, but you've got a lot of recruitment experience as well. As an HR recruiter myself, often we won't get the opportunity to represent someone, for example, from public sector to work in financial services, because they'll be really specific and say, no, they must have financial services sector experience. Or in your Sainsbury's example, they must have retail experience. And I think you're a great example of how actually it's not always about the sector experience. It's about the personality. It's about the culture. It's about the ability to, be able to transition yourself and adapt to different environments. And one of the things we find quite difficult sometimes when you know a personality really, really well, and you can say to a client, look, I know this individual, I've met them, they would fit into your business great. I know your culture, trust us. And often you'll still get a no because, they don't have financial services. And it's sometimes so binary, so black and white. It can make our jobs as specialists quite difficult. But actually, you're a great example of how, you've clearly been able to adapt and be very successful in a variety of sectors. And that must be one of the challenges I'm sure you will get in your career coaching service is people asking for career advice. Maybe they want to get out of public sector and they want to get into financial services or vice versa. And it's just really nice for you to have that expertise. Have you come across that kind of objection before in your career? Either to advice to the individual themselves or even to the hiring manager? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say to the hiring manager, first of all, look at those transferable skills that they've developed over the years. What are their core strengths? Where have their experiences? What have they achieved as well? Look at their achievements. And I would say similar to the person that wants to transition across as well, thinking about, when they're looking at the roles that they want to apply for, looking at their skills and experience and trying to, I suppose, market themselves in the best way that they can, and giving examples, if they're specifically asking for, I don't know, employee relations experience, for example, giving a variety of examples of how they've worked in that particular area and what they've achieved, and really sort of just showing them exactly, how they would be able to transition, I suppose.
I know it's quite nice because as a recruiter myself, it's nice to be able to talk to someone about a subject that's, I know, is equally passionate to you as it is to me. I know we're from slightly different spheres, but obviously you're giving career advice and guidance and you're helping candidates to take control of their futures, which is fantastic. I wonder if you could give us a bit of an insight into your work then, or your more recent work, I guess, as a career coach. What kind of advice have you been giving? What kind of clients have you been working with?
So yes, I've been working with a variety of different clients, from graduates to people that are mid-career, and they've sort of been in, a couple of different roles and they're not sure where to go next. I've also worked with women returners who, again, have had a career break, but just, they've been out of work for, say, maybe 10, 12 years and they don't know what to do next. And they want to get back into employment. So yeah, really, I can work with anybody, no matter what part of their career they're in. And in terms of working with the clients, I generally sort of find out, at the beginning what their key issues are. And I tend to use like questionnaire style exercises for clients before we meet with them. And then this forms the basis for the coaching sessions. They usually last they usually do about 2 to 3 exercises per session as well.
If I came to you as a client and I was, wanted you to help me to take control of my future, and I'm looking for my dream career, whatever that might be, what would be your approach for me? What would be the approach going forward?
So yes, in the first ever call, I would, explain what my role is and make it clear that I'm there to guide you through your journey. I'm agreeing what your key objectives are. So always referring back to each of the sessions to make sure that we can measure success. And it's about guiding the conversations around the exercises. So, I would never just tell someone what job to go and do, but it would be about possibly making suggestions with them, looking at options, looking at themes throughout the session and reflecting back to them. And it's about giving them that space to really think and reflect about it. And I've worked with clients who often say, I'm not sure what I want to do, but, working through these sessions, they've sort of, when you're reflecting back to them, they've realised they can hear those threads coming through, and it kind of is quite powerful.
Fantastic. Now, I know that I obviously had a sneak peek at your website prior to this podcast. I know that there's something that you are, one of the things that you follow is you ask for essential questions of every individual that you work with when you're developing a very bespoke and tailored career management programs for individuals. I wonder if you could just walk me through what these 4 questions are and why you feel that these are the 4 sort of most critical questions, if you like.
Yes, sure. So the first one is all about who am I as an individual. So it's all about finding out who the individual is and understanding, where their interests lie, what satisfying achievements they've had in their careers, what their work values are, and what skills they want to use. So it's kind of like establishing, especially if someone's coming in to me and they just really have no idea, this is kind of like the starting point. Obviously, I may have some clients who kind of know roughly what they want to do. So I might sort of go on to what do I want to do? So this is all about, clarifying, thinking about their world as they would like it. And there's some really lovely exercises I do where they actually get to visualize how the elements of the job satisfaction and how they would want their world to be. And looking at also what their key motivators and skills are. So it's understanding, delving in that bit further to exactly what it is they want. And then the third question is all about how do I get what I want? So we do lots of exercises around, for example, blocks and bridges. So, for example, if they've come up with, well, I really want to go and do this, but whatever it is, I don't know, they want to go and be a teacher, but what is it that's blocking them to doing that? And then looking at, well, how can we overcome those blocks? And looking at breaking that down for the individual, or what is stopping the individual and what would help them to overcome that. So it's just, again, it's like looking at how they can get to that next step, really. And then the final stages are, once they've realised, well, I want to go and be a teacher, or I want to, whatever it is they want to go and do, what are my next steps? How am I actually going to achieve that? So, it's looking at action plans and, people that are familiar in HR, in the HR world with a personal development plan. It's all, very similar to that kind of mindset, I suppose. And it's breaking it down also into practical steps. So, well, I want to achieve this, but actually, how am I going to achieve it? And what steps do I need to take to reach that goal?
Do you find there are certain, I'm from a personal experience now within my family, do you find there are certain trends within the motivational piece, or, the blockages or the bridges, as you call them? So, for example, you mentioned that you deal with a lot of women who are returning to work and may have had quite long gaps away. And I know from my own family that sometimes that can affect confidence, for example, might be one that they don't feel that they've still got the skills and not up to date. But in your experience, have you seen particular trends in what those blockages might be within individuals, or are they very much unique to each client?
There are some similarities in terms of, there's always going to be the common denominator, like time or money. I think, those are often the key ones for most people, but it's, I suppose, working out what the individual wants as a priority. And, there's also an exercise to do around values. So it's working out, well, what are my key values? And, often I worked with somebody recently and they said, oh, I really just want to find a job that pays really well. And, I was sort of gently guiding them and saying, well, there's lots of different roles. Wherever you start, there's always going to be a starting salary and an upper limit, and you're going to work your way up your career. So it's really important, I suppose, to think about, well, what it is you're passionate about, because ultimately, if you're going to go into something just because of the salary, then, you might not be you might not be happy at the end of the day. So, yeah. I obviously don't have to tell people too much, but just guiding them.
Yeah, I guess it's for them to come up with the answers and you kind of ask the questions so they can find it themselves. Funny enough, I listened to a podcast recently. I'm trying to think who it was by. I think it might have been Tim Robbins, but they were talking about, we were talking about the money thing you were just mentioning there, I want lots of money. And he was actually saying in this podcast, look, many of us could live like kings if we wanted to. If you want to live by the sea and you barely want to work at all, you want to have a little bit of a lifestyle, you want to have cocktails on the beach, you want to have all those things, you can kind of do that now, but you just can't do it in the UK. And he was just saying that these options are available, but there's always a sacrifice at the other side. So if you want that, then you could probably go and relocate to, I don't know, the Philippines or Thailand or somewhere else and probably have that lifestyle. But with that comes other things that you don't have now. And it's when you understand what's really important to you, you sometimes change your life decisions. I mean, it's obviously a slightly different example, but it's quite interesting in the podcast. You think, actually, these are the things a lot of people aspire to have. And sometimes it's not always about money. It's about breaking down what is it you really want from the money to be able to enable you to do. I just thought it was quite interesting to listen through. I love the idea of the action plans. I'm a keen, completely outside of work, but I'm a keen athlete. I train all the time, but I have my own coach for personal training. And he keeps, the reason I have it is I understand the science myself. So it's not about the knowledge piece, but I need to be accountable to make sure that I do those things. And having my own coach just makes me accountable day to day to make sure that I'm doing the things that if I didn't have him, I may sometimes not follow that plan quite as strictly as I do. So I think it's really important if people are really genuinely passionate and motivated to make a career change, that if you've got an action plan, which you obviously put in place for them, it really gives you that focus. It really gives you that direction to help you achieve what you want to. And I think that's really pleased to hear that's kind of your final point, because I think that's something that's so essential to help with motivation, objectives and goal setting is fantastic. And I'm sure you must have some really nice results. Are you able to talk about anyone that you've, obviously not mentioning names, but any particular case studies that have been real success stories for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with someone recently, and she just wasn't sure what she wanted to go and do, and she's now got an action plan in place, and I've spoken to her recently, and she really is clear about what she wants to do, and it actually felt really satisfying myself to have known, well, I've helped that person along their journey. So yeah, and now I'm helping them develop their CV. So it
must be really fulfilling. Yeah, no, it's nice. It's good. Now, we know as specialist HR and learning development recruiters, as JGA Recruitment, we work in the same market space, but we're seeing every day, and it's very much public, that unemployment figures are pretty much at all-time lows. There's a real war for talent. It's a bit of a cliche, but there is, and it's, businesses are really trying to attract the best talent, and the talent doesn't seem to be as readily as available, if you like, as it once was, which is why people like ourselves are able to work as we do, because we go and try and find that talent. But it's getting harder and harder for employers to not just locate it, but then attract staff to their brands as well, which is, it's bad news for them, great news for us. But I wondered if, what do you think employers could do to improve their ability, not just to recruit top talent, but attract it, and then what I would say is probably the most important metric in all of this, which is then be able to retain it, in your experience?
Yeah, so, as I said at the beginning, I do have experience of looking at employee engagement within organisations. And, this is really important because, it has an impact in terms of, productivity, and also the longevity of somebody's in their career, and, and all those reasons, they may decide to leave, and employee branding as well. I would say what employers need to be looking at is, making sure some quick wins are things like, making sure they listen to their employees' needs. For example, they could set up employee forums or even just regular meetings where they have where they're listening and to what the concerns are, and then, a way to implement any changes. So it could just be a simple, a quick weekly huddle even, or it could be something more formal like an employee forum if it's sort of talking about larger changes. Also, what I think is really important is ensuring that there are development plans in place for everybody within the organisation, even if you don't think that person's, if you think that person's really content and happy, we're always developing, and, it's important that we allow people space to grow and develop in their roles that they're working in. So, and again, research has shown that, people that have more development in their roles are going to be more satisfied. So I think that's really key. Also, something interestingly I read about recently is community engagement, and some research was showing that actually allowing your staff or your employees to volunteer has not only increases the skills amongst that workforce, but also again can improve the employee engagement, I suppose, in that relationship with the employer, because you feel like you're giving something back to the community you're actually servicing. So, I mean, the company that I currently work for, we've just recently partnered with a national charity, and we're going to be looking at ways to do some fundraising, but also they offer mentoring schemes, so our members of staff can volunteer as mentors within the community as well. Finally, just regular one-to-ones, keep talking to your people, really. Throughout the years I've sort of worked with different line managers, and they often say, well, when did you last have a proper one-to-one with the person in your team? And they're like, oh, well, we haven't really, we just sort of talk across the desks. And I think it's important to give that time and that space to your staff, really.
Yeah, I think really valid points. I was making some notes as you mentioned there, because I think all of this rings true for what we're seeing in the industry as recruiters as well. I mean, I think the first thing is statistically, more people move for career development opportunities than they do money. I think that's kind of a misconception that people always move to get better salaries. Actually, salary ranks quite low typically in people's motivations for changing jobs from a recruitment perspective. So I think that personal development plan is absolutely critical. Having a direction to know where people want to move, really, really important. And also that links to the one-to-one piece you've just mentioned, that most people tend to want to change jobs because they don't get on with their manager, or they don't believe their manager believes in them, or they don't have a career plan given to them by their manager. So that one-to-one communication channel really, really sort of opens that up. And I think that's a brilliant advice, fantastic advice in terms of how businesses can really help retain talent. And actually, interestingly, just I wasn't where you were going to mention the charitable piece that your current employer offers, but we do something similar here, and it's gone down really well. We haven't offered a volunteer piece yet at JGA, but we give a half day off work for people that want to give blood. And with only only 4% of the population give blood on a regular basis, and yet I think there's sort of 2 in 3 of us are going to need it at some point in our lives. So it's something we've started this year, and it's had really good uptake, and it's really motivated the staff. It's had good engagement, and actually it's just a really nice thing to be able to do. So we give a half day off for people to do that, and I think it's. Obviously, you're getting fulfillment out of what your business is able to offer. And I think our staff are doing the same. I think if more businesses, did different things to really help the charitable side of things, it could really make a difference, across the board. So great advice. Well, listen, what I'd like to do, Joanna, is find out a little bit more about you. And then we're going to dive into, so for those listening right now, you want to stay on tune, you want to stay on board here, because in the second half of this podcast, we're going to find out all about the skills that we think are most in demand for employers in 2019. Joanna's going to give us some advice on how you should best prepare for an interview, so some of her top do's and don'ts. And we're going to talk a little bit about some statistics and studies that have been out there, and some of Joanna's recent articles as well. So do stay tuned. We've got lots to get through. And if you are looking to make a career change, or you're looking for some career advice, and you definitely want to listen to the second part of this podcast. But first things first, let's find out a little bit more about you.
Time to find out more about you.
So, Joanna, how would your friends describe you?
Oh, well, I was asking them the other day, actually. We all went out for some lunch, and I said, how would you describe me? So, yeah, they were laughing. They said they thought I was fun, and one of the first things they said was organised. So I was like, okay, thank you. They always say I'm really organised, even though I don't think I am. But they think I'm really loyal, a good listener, and also quite thoughtful and empathetic. So, yeah, it was really nice to hear, actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, perfect qualities for a successful career coach. So I can't say there's any surprises here, but good to know that that's how they feel, which is fantastic. What's your proudest achievement to date?
I think it would be, qualifying as a career coach last year, and, setting up practice since then. So, I was really, that was tough to do, alongside my existing part-time role. And, I've got a young family as well. So, just really proud to be able to do that. And
fantastic. And you've also got a BSc, of course. I mentioned introduction in psychology. Did you find that your BSc in psychology helped with your career coaching qualifications as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's lots of things we did around kind of body language and tone of voice. And these were things we did cover back when I did my degree. So, and a kind of understanding, I suppose, some of the theory as well, around, say, for example, there was a theory we learned about called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that's all about, once your kind of basic needs have been met in terms of physical, then it's all about, well, how can you become, the best person that you can be? And there's kind of like a hierarchy of things you need to go through. So just, I suppose a little bit of theory did help as well.
Sure. That sounds interesting. We can have a whole podcast on that, I'm sure. And of course, I wasn't sure actually, because you were qualified Thomas International Practitioner in psychometric testing as well. Was that part of the coaching course that you did, or did you undertake that qualification separately?
No, actually, that's through my current employer. As we do psychometric tests for anybody coming into the organisation. We do something called PPAs, which are personal profile assessments, and it's all based on the idea that you have 4 different types of behaviours that you display in the workplace. based on the psychologist Thomas himself. And that asks you a series of questions, and then it gives you like a profile. And so, I was qualified and trained to be able to understand the results and give feedback around that. And also there's another assessment we sometimes use called a General Intelligence Assessment, or GIA. And that's all about how quickly somebody can learn and process information, and how accurate as well. So I've trained in the current role that I'm in, and it's something we use as a recruitment tool, but also we're using it more increasingly in team development as well. So thinking about how the teams can gel more and how they can become the best that they can be in terms of achieving what their overall objectives or targets are. So it's quite powerful.
Great. Yeah, no, it sounds it. It sounds like you've got a really close-knit sort of rounded levels of qualifications. You link the psychology kind of links with the Thomas International psychometric piece, which links to the HR management diploma, the postgraduate diploma you've got, and of course the career coaching. It's kind of really four really nice, relevant qualifications for what you're moving into. It's just funny when you go right back to that A-level or GCSE sort of conversation, how, reading back on it, knowing what you've achieved and the qualifications you have, it must be quite funny just reading that back. So who right now then, who really motivates you and why?
I know this is going to sound really cheesy, but am I allowed to say my husband?
Yeah, of course you can. We like a bit of cheesy. It's all fine. It's a common answer. The partner's probably the most common answer we get, so it's not a problem.
Yeah, well, he's actually, funnily enough, he set up his own business this year, and he's also managed to get a publishing deal for his so a couple of books that he's written recently as well. So I don't know, I just find that it's kind of really motivated me to kind of move my own career forward and looking at what he's been able to achieve. He's got a book coming out early next year, and it's really exciting. So he's motivating me as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, send me when it comes out. Send us a link, and we'll share it on the HR L&D podcast if we can get a few early purchases. But also, it can be a big step. You're taking a bit of a leap now into your own business in your JV career coach business. So if he was part of that inspiration to take that leap, which many, as you know, as a career coach, many people want to do their own businesses, whether it's alongside their current work or as a separate entity, and it's really difficult to take that gamble, to take that step. There's so many things that, as you say, blockages and bridges that stop us from doing these things. And actually, if that's stopping us from achieving our dreams or achieving our passions, that's really difficult. And if he's been part of that motivation to make you make that leap, then fantastic, great example, love it. So, great question. I love this question, and it's a bit random, but I'm always intrigued the answer I'm going to get back. So, if I could give you any superpower, what would it be and why?
I would love to be able to travel back in time. I love when I've been watching like Back to the Future and being able to just see, how people lived in different eras, and if I could sort of go back and sort of just to be able to experience it. And I had two, if I'm allowed a second one, which was to heal illnesses in some way. Because I always think about people that have, been in our lives, that we've lost, there's, with things like cancer and just other diseases, and just to be able to heal people would be an amazing power.
Well, I mean, it's hard for me to argue with either of those. I think the going back in time to your A-level conversation would be quite interesting, your career conversation. Yeah. But also, it's quite clear from the podcast already that, the charitable side of you is definitely coming through, so that doesn't surprise me. And what a great response. So we'll take that. We're going to jump into a quick advert break, and then we're going to find out a little bit more about some of the skills that are most in demand, and we're going to help prepare someone for an interview. So some of your top do's and don'ts. So stay with us. We're back in one moment.
Engage, learn, perform with Think Learning, specialists in learning and performance technologies. We're experts in solving the challenges of targeting, tracking, training in regulated environments. We have developed the Totara platform to provide a cost-effective, organisation-wide talent solution that can help you to provide a safer and better place to work. Customisable workflows promotes engagement through onboarding and induction, whilst an intuitive user interface helps drive ongoing engagement with learning. Bespoke workflows for performance appraisal and integration to payroll and recruitment systems transform Totara into a powerful and holistic talent platform. You'll find us to be responsive, collaborative and solution focused. Visit thinklearning.com for more information. The L&D Podcast. Final questions to help listeners engage, learn and perform.
Great. So, Joanna, statistics and studies, such as the Gallup research, tell us that 70% of individuals are not committed to delivering their best performance and therefore would potentially move positions for the right opportunity. So for a lot of HR and L&D professionals out there who are perhaps considering a career move, might be listening to this right now, but they don't know where to begin, what would you advise?
Yeah, if they're not sure where to begin, what I would really suggest is kind of like a kind of skills analysis about, what have they, listing all of those skills that they've developed over their career so far. Thinking about, what are their interests? What has interested them the most? What have they found the most satisfying in terms of their achievements? So, for example, with satisfying achievements, how can they, even if they think back to some scenarios in terms of, just think of a time when they actually did achieve something and what it is they achieved and what made them achieve that and how could they develop that? How would they like to do more of that? Would they like to do more of that in the future?
I guess, considering a career move, perhaps they're a bit scared to make it, so they don't really know where to begin. How can they sort of take that leap, really? What would you advise before they jumped? What things they need to consider and how can they establish whether that actually is the right move for them, I guess?
Okay, so in terms of moving, if you're thinking about moving roles, it's really thinking about looking at your key strengths. What are they? Listing those. Looking at your key achievements and thinking about, well, what were the satisfying achievements in your career, and looking at, thinking about what it is you want to do next in terms of how that would potentially match, and looking at have there been some skills gaps, for example, some skills that you're thinking, right now, I really want to be able to, broaden your understanding of employment law, for example, and how, can this be something you could develop in your existing role, or is this something that, you really need, you want to go externally and change, working for a different organization or different company? So thinking about what skills you have, and then looking forward, thinking about, well, what skills do you want to develop more? And, what other achievements, what achievements you've achieved so far, and thinking about, well, what I really would like to be able to do. I'd like to be able to, go and, run a training course, for example, or, improve my presentation skills, and thinking about, what types of roles will that gap be able to, where will that come in, I suppose? And then, start looking at researching roles, looking at what kind of roles are out there, thinking about also what your values are as well. So often I think this can get missed when people are looking about moving. They think, I want to move, but I don't know where to begin. But thinking about where your core values are as an individual can really help in terms of matching, the types of organisations that you would like to potentially go and work for. And often people say to me, I don't really mind what the role is in some situations, but what's important to me is actually the organisation, and will they develop me, and does it fit in with my own values? So I think that's really important and key as well, in terms of thinking about where you might go next.
No, I think that's great advice. I think it's worth mentioning as well, as not just myself as a specialist HR recruiter, but yourself as a career coach as well. There are places people can go to ask those questions, which is, to come to us, for example, at JGA Recruitment. It's a free call, free service. Someone can give us a call and ask, what does my CV look like? What skills am I lacking? Where do we see that they could probably fit in? And they can obviously call yourself and do exactly the same process if they want to establish, if they're not quite sure where they want to go. There's lots of free resources out there and free agencies like ourselves that we're happy to give that advice. And of course, you're CV never goes anywhere unless, you're happy for it to do so. So you can do it in complete confidentiality. You'll have opportunities potentially run by you, in a proactive approach. You can say, actually, that's not for me. Having read that description, I thought I wanted this, but actually that's not what I want at all. And that role you sent me, I'd never considered before, but that sounds great. And I think you mentioned as well, training, setting up, they want to do a training course or improve their presentation skills, but there's other things out there as well, like perhaps broadening into an international remit. Well, if your current company doesn't have, an international remit within its function, then that might be a good reason for you wanting to make a shift. And that's not about salary. That's not, about getting a promotion necessarily. But if you want to broaden your skills, sometimes a sector change, which clearly, you've changed sectors several times yourself, Joanna, you'll know the benefits of that. If you want to get international, then sometimes you have to make a move to make that happen. But there are loads of people out there like Joanna and like ourselves who can help people. We're always happy to answer questions. So just pick up the phone or drop either of us an email. And obviously I'll put Joanna's details in the episode notes. If you are one of those people listening to this right now and perhaps aren't quite sure where you want to go next. But one thing I'm really keen to find out about, I know you've done some research on this, Joanna, is what are the skills that are most in demand and, of course, least in demand for employers in 2019?
Yeah, so, I was thinking about this recently, particularly when we've been doing some recruitment. I think what tends to, and this is also something that's sort of quite relevant in the news at the moment in terms of Brexit, but kind of making decisions. I think this is a skill that sometimes gets overlooked, but is really, really important. So it's about, how do people make decisions and the processes that they come to, and once they've made those decisions, I suppose standing by them, as much as they need to. I think creativity is also quite important, and sometimes again it can get overlooked in terms of you think naturally there might be roles that naturally lend themselves to being creative. For example, I don't know, like in the media industry or those types of roles. But I think creativity spans across all different roles, all different organizations, and there's different, just thinking about different ways of working. So that's, I would say, is really key. We've sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, but also about managing people effectively. And that is highly linked to your engagement within the organization. And managing people in the right way will result in being, effective teams, people that want to come into work and want to do a good job. And ultimately, that will improve, if they've got a customer or a client, that will improve the customer and client experience as well. I would say presentation skills. Again, I've seen this crop up in the organisations I've worked for over the years. It's something that it can span across so many different types of roles, and is really something that often people do lack confidence with. So I think it is so important and something that really is needed in many roles. Negotiation skills. I think, again, this is kind of span across, so many different roles and obvious ones, like with, trade unions, for example. And, you've often heard about, negotiations going horribly wrong in the press recently with, for example, we've got all the strikes happening. But again, I think, there's obviously the high level ones that you're aware about, but negotiation happens, all across, even if you're not customer facing, you might have to negotiate internally, for example, with another department about deadlines, or it's sort of quite it can be quite wide and varying in terms of the skill set that you need for that. And also something finally that I think is really important is collaboration. Often you hear about people that are working in silos within organizations, or not working effectively within their own teams. And I think collaboration really, again, is something that is important. Even if you are working on your own, you do need to. There are times when you will have to work with other people, but most people these days are working in teams, and it's just important to kind of have that skill set there, I suppose, where you are able to work in collaboration. And I've seen some situations where it's gone horribly wrong, and I just think it's really important personally. And yeah, in terms of least, I was having to think about this, and I think, all skills are relevant at some point in your life. I struggle to answer that. But, I think obviously there's sort of like skills over the years that have become less important because of, industry and trade having changed. But, generally speaking, I think, in terms of all soft skills, I think they're all important and they can all be relevant and used. At some point in my life, so
I fully agree. I'll be honest, I struggle with the least in demand question as well. It's hard to think of a skill that isn't useful, but I think you're right on the money with the points you've raised. I've summarised them here for those that just wants to reflect, to take notes if they're listening. Is creativity. Being really, really important. Negotiation skills, definitely on the rise in all industries, I think. Leadership skills, it only takes one search on Google to say, what makes a great leader, and you'll be populated with millions and millions of results. It's a hot topic for everyone of how to get the best out of your leaders, how to be a great leader. And I think leadership is a really hot topic. And I don't think there's, necessarily a perfect example or examples one question, a perfect answer yet in how to create the perfect leader, because there are so many in different sectors and they take so many different guises, but leadership definitely important. Collaboration, I think absolutely totally agree. We're in a world where we're going more and more global all the time. We're not just collaborating in our teams that we work with and we sit next to every day, but actually we're able now to collaborate globally through video links, through networking, through a variety of different resources, like podcasting as we are right now. And I think, as technology advances, that's one skill that I think is really only going to increase in demand, the ability to be collaborative and the ability to utilize those communication skills in a contemporary way. And that kind of links really well with the presentation skills that you mentioned. Presentations now really, really important. We're often required in all of our roles, whether you're working in HR, L&D, payroll, or whatever, to present to senior as we get more data, access to more data, senior presentation levels to board level presentations and stakeholders and so on. So I think 5 really good points there: creativity, negotiation, leadership, collaboration, and presentation. Fantastic. So I mentioned earlier on, Joanna, that you would be here to give some advice to someone who maybe they have an interview set up, maybe it's their first interview for 10 or 12 years and they're returning for work. What would be your top do's and your top don'ts if you were advising someone to prepare for an interview?
I would say practice is the key, especially for your opening statement. So really thinking about your elevated pitch, and and often people may have heard of this phrase before, but thinking about, well, who are you as an individual? How are you going to sort of open that interview up? What are the key things you want to get across just in that first, couple of minutes? And often it's true that recruiters make their decisions in the first few minutes of meeting with somebody. So it's really important to make sure that you've got that opening presentation bit about yourself really sort of practiced and well rehearsed. Lots of interviews these days have competency-based questionnaires, and what I mean by that is they will ask you, okay, so when have you had a problem and how have you resolved it? So, being able to bring examples and think of recent examples and a variety of examples as well in terms of how you've actually achieved, or if it's a problem or if you've achieved something, what those, bringing those to life and using stories as well if you can. So again, it sort of helps people, along the journey in terms of the interview and making it into kind of like a more natural conversation as much as possible. Research is really key. So you want to know, obviously, find out as much as you can about the company that you're going to have the interview with, and who are the people that are interviewing you. If you can do a little bit of background research on them on LinkedIn, looking at the company and as a whole, what are their missions, what's their mission statement, what are they trying to achieve, what in terms of finances, looking at their financial reports. And then using that as a basis for any questions that you may have as well. So, at the end of the interview, I know we're jumping a little bit, we haven't gone through the beginning, the middle. So when you get to the end of the interview, they may, they often say, do you have any questions for us? And you can say, well, I've researched this and I've seen this. And could you just maybe explain a little bit more? And again, it's showing that you're proactive and that you have done your research as well. So I think also body language. I think sometimes we get so het up on what we're going to say that we forget about how our body language is. And again, it's making sure it's open, making sure you're giving eye contact, just thinking about that as well. And then the way that you're saying things as well. Because if you've had time to rehearse what you're going to say, again, it will come across and more confidently. So, yeah, I think that's really key. And in terms of don'ts, I would say don't ask what the salary is going to be. That often puts people off, in my experience. I would save that until you've been offered the role. You should have some idea roughly, what the salary is going to be ballpark. And then, once you've been offered the role, then that is the time to kind of negotiate, I would say. Also, what I've noticed is when people are in interview situations, they often use the phrase we, and I kind of like that's a little bit of a pet hate. I think, take ownership for something and say, I, it's just a slight change, but it kind of makes it gives the impression, if you're saying we all the time, that you haven't actually done it. So just a small thing. Don't sell yourself short. So really sort of sell, what your key skills are, what your key achievements are. And don't, so really obvious, but don't badmouth your previous employers. Try and be as positive as you can. But, it just doesn't kind of come across that well. So I think, those are my top ones.
Excellent. I think they're great examples. I think I'm going to add a couple just because we obviously do a lot of interviews and see interviews every time that just expand on the points you've mentioned, which I think are absolutely valid and correct where you are as well. You mentioned the research. I think not just researching the company, but actually, make sure you know why you want the job. Most people will go into an interview and say, well, I know you were established in 1883 and you have 1,200 staff. That's great, but that's what every other interviewee can come in with that information. It's how you can use the knowledge that you research to sell back your passion, which kind of links into your body language piece. Saying, look, I know you've got 1,200 employees. That's great because I really want to be part of a big organization. I know you're established in 1883, which is fantastic. So I want to join a secure business that's got a real reputation in the industry, who's become a staple in whatever market it is you're doing. So try and use your research to justify why you're passionate about the job. We see so many times people going in and sort of quoting research verbatim without really thinking about how they can use that research to elevate themselves, linking to elevator pitch, as to why they're right for the job. And I think it's a two-way process. You've got to really sell why you want the business and why you want the opportunity, so that they should be selling their business back to you. And you'll often find, if you say, 1883, a really stable company, that they'll come back in and go, absolutely. In fact, we've been going from this and this, and they'll start selling the opportunity back to you. And that's a really good position to be in when you're in a two-way conversation. So absolutely right on the research piece. And I would just sort of extend that a little bit. And I love the fact you mentioned, look at things like financial statements. Don't just look at the About Us section on a website. Go a little bit deeper, because 9 times out of 10, the people you're interviewing against, there is a war on talent, there's going to be other people against you at the moment when you go to an interview. If they're just doing the About Us section and you've done a little bit more and you can relate it back to why you want the job, that will give you a huge advantage in demonstrating to the recruiter or the hiring manager that you really want the job and you've really thought about your research and thought about why you want to work there. So 100% agree. The fantastic examples and reasons for the top do's. And I think if you can link those and mirror the values of the business, so if you look at a mission statement, as you mentioned, and they say, we are a passionate business, and if you can sort of use that kind of language back in the interview as well, I'm passionate like you are about X, Y, and Z, be it, it might be the charitable things that obviously you're passionate about, Joanna, in an example. If you see a business has, real charitable objectives, and that's something that speaks to you, mention that in the interview, because that's a genuine mirrored value that will your passion will come naturally then rather than forced. So I think those things are really, really excellent examples. I think the only thing I would add, if someone is listening to this in my recruitment experience, is remember to close the interview. So at the end of the process, always remind the hiring manager, always remind the interviewer that, you know what, I really want this job. If there's anything I haven't covered in this interview or anything you wish I'd expand on a little bit more detail, please let me know. I can cover it now if you'd like me to. But I wanted to finish to say thank you so much for meeting me today. It's a job I really want. I'm really passionate about this, and I can't wait to hear from you. And sometimes just closing the process can be a really good finisher and something that the interviewers will remember. So Love the answers. I'm going to quickly run through them just so people can make notes again. So Joanna's examples were practice your elevator pitch. Absolutely agree. Practice makes perfect. And don't be worried if you go to an interview and don't get the job. That's all part of the practice piece. So, sometimes you will have to go to 2 or 3 interviews until you get that perfect role. But don't be worried if you're not successful. Just keep practicing and you will get better. Interviewing is very much a skill. Definitely, as Joanna mentioned, come up with competency examples, stories, as you mentioned, really relevant right now across social media, whether in Instagram, Facebook. It's all about telling stories. We live our life in stories almost. So to be able to talk about something passionately that's relevant, of course, to the question they've asked is a fantastic piece of advice. Always do research, as you've mentioned. Have questions prepared. That shows you've thought about the interview prior to going. But as Joanna mentioned, make sure one of those questions isn't about salary at the first stage. One of the worst things you can do is go into an interview and say, the first question you ask is, what's the salary? I want to work these hours and I want this, and this, because that's not really considering the opportunity. That's just saying what you want. And it can lead you down the wrong path. So, have all those conversations a little bit later in the process. And then body language, be passionate and remember it. Because I think one of the biggest reasons people don't get jobs in what we do often is because people were just too nervous. And if you do that practice that Joanna recommends, that can really help you, get over those nerves and come across confident and passionate about what you're doing. So thank you so much, Joanna, for sharing that advice. It's absolutely what we're seeing in the market as well. I think it's really, really useful. So take notes, go back over this part of the podcast if you need to. And I hope that helps you prepare for your next interview if you listen to this right now. Now, moving forward, I read your recent article, Joanna, on LinkedIn, which was about why it's important that people do bother with flexible working requests. It's something that is a real hot topic at the moment. And as a working mum yourself and as a working parent myself as well, I know you've got 2 children, but you referenced how you found it particularly tricky finding that work-life balance. And so I guess, do you recommend people still go ahead with flexible working requests? And what does the legislation tell us? What are the benefits to employers for offering flexible working?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd recommend if, our lives are changing and populations are growing, we have more caring responsibilities in terms of, older populations and young families as well. So I think absolutely, even if you don't have those caring responsibilities, lives are changing. We're becoming more flexible in our approach in terms of, how we want to, work. So absolutely do apply and do consider it. In terms of legislation, anybody has the right to apply for flexible working if they have over 26 weeks service. So, and employers they have a legal obligation to consider it. So they can't just turn around and say, no, we don't fancy, even considering this. They have to go through a process. They have there's 5 reasons, why they could turn down the request. So it could be, they could say it's down to cost or the inability to recruit. It could if it impacts on the quality or performance, or if there's an impact on the customer needs or an inability to reorganize the work. So those are the 5 reasons that they can decline it. But no, absolutely, anybody can apply and everybody has the right. And I think employers are becoming more, wise to this now. And in terms of, it also has a huge benefits to employers as well. I think, you sometimes think, well, this is kind of like a one-way street in terms of benefit, but it can help employers reduce their turnover costs and retain the people that they need to retain, especially, when we've got, a war on talent at the moment. It can also, save in terms of overhead costs, for example. If somebody wants to work from home, then, you're going to be saving on the costs, for the office space. Again, it can increase staff morale and engagement. And we've spoken earlier about, how important that is at the moment. And, with all of those things as well, it can increase, the customer satisfaction at the end of the day, because if you've got happy staff, then that will reflect in terms of the service that they're giving. And also, if you're trying to recruit, in terms of being able to make sure that you are recruiting the best people for the roles, and having that flexible working opportunities will make sure you can attract the best candidates for the roles as well.
Great. Yeah. I think, and we're certainly seeing a lot more employers now, coming around to this idea of flexible working. It seems to be such a slow process for people to really, understand the benefits, if you see. But we're seeing many of our clients now offering flexible working, and they're not seeing major changes as perhaps some of the worries in terms of productivity. And as you say, actually productivity often goes up because when people, as you say, have that flexible working opportunity, they become more engaged with the brand. They are, and not thankful, that's the wrong word, but they're more committed because, there's trust is a two-way thing. And if an employer is trusting them to work from home, you often find that if home is the flexible request they're looking for, that actually when you're working from home, you have that kind of guilty, angel on your shoulder, whatever it might be, saying, actually, they're giving me that trust. I need to give that back. And you find you get it back in spades. And I think that, we're seeing loads of studies come out now about the benefits of offering flexible working and what that can achieve. And I think it's great that just to make it clear, as you have done, that there is legislation out there to say that you can make a flexible working request. It's not guaranteed it's going to be accepted for the reasons that you mentioned, but now is the time where employers are starting to make that transition. I think it's a really, really, well, you've worded it perfectly there, Joanna, in terms of what some of those benefits are and why it should be offered. Fantastic. Right now, what do you think is stopping most professionals from achieving their career goals? As a career coach, why would you recommend that someone used a career coach such as yourself to really help them progress?
I think what's stopping people is having that time and having that space to actually think about it. And we're in such busy lives. We've got lots of commitments. And often we don't give ourselves that time and that space just to reflect and think back, what it is, I'm actually looking to achieve. So, that's what I offer, when I'm working with clients, is that time. And also sometimes there's a fear factor as well, I don't know how would I possibly change, how could I possibly transition? And it's kind of fear of the unknown. But what I do with clients is it's giving them a structured space in a non-judgmental way to really think and reflect about what it is they want to do and how they can achieve it. And it's designed around their own individual goals.
And as a recruiter, we see candidates from all walks of life. And, when we do work with candidates that have worked with a career coach, whether it's yourself, John, or somebody else, it is noticeable the difference in their confidence levels and their how focused they are in knowing what they want, which actually makes our job a lot easier as well, because we don't need to put opportunities by them that aren't going to be relevant. And it's much easier to sell an applicant when you know exactly what they want because they've been clear with you and they've got that confidence because they've worked with a career coach like yourself to know what their goals are and know what skills they have and what skills they want to learn. So we're a recruiter, but we work with loads of candidates that have worked with career coaches as well. And I have to say that, when we do work with those people, you can see a slight change in mentality and focus, which I think is fantastic. So if you are considering service of a career coach, as I said, I'll put Joanna's details in the episode notes. Do check them out, and maybe that's a step that you may want to consider. Well, I'm really sad to be almost at the end of this HR L&D podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think we could have talked for hours. So we're gonna open the HR L&D vault.
Opening the L&D vault.
I'm going to ask you 3 quick questions, if I may, Joanna. What is the one piece of advice you would give to someone working in HR or L&D right now?
So the one piece of advice I would give is, just get the experience that you can, work in terms of, different teams, really sort of focus your energies on where you want to go with that.
With the benefit of hindsight, what would be the one career decision you would change?
The one career decision I would change, I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't think I would change anything at this point. I think everything feels like it's happened for a reason. The only thing I would say is that I worked for Sainsbury's for, quite a number of years. So I think I would have perhaps moved slightly earlier if I'd had the opportunity. But other than that, I think, I feel quite happy with what, the choices I've made so far. Yeah.
Great. And finally, if we're sitting here a year from now celebrating what a fantastic year it's been for you, what will you have hoped to have achieved?
Just being able to do some more work, more career coaching, and, increasing my experience in that and, being successful in that at the moment. And, I think that's just enough for me at the moment. So
it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate because you're obviously working full time as well. So kudos to you. Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you ever so much for joining me on the HR L&D podcast today. As I mentioned, if you are interested in finding out more about Joanna's services, please go to www.jvcareercoach.co.uk. I will also put a link to Joanna Vinacour's LinkedIn profile, so if you want to find out and actually see for yourself her career history and trajectory to date, then you can obviously check that out as well. But for now, that is the end of this podcast. It's been a fantastic chat. Hopefully there's lots for you listeners to take away. If you are preparing for an interview or you need some career advice, please do go back and listen over again to aspects of this podcast if you think they may help. But that leaves us to close. I want to say thank you ever so much, Joanna, for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I will look forward to speaking to you all again in a couple of weeks. Joanna, thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the L&D podcast with your host, Nick Day of JGA Recruitment, specialist HR recruiters. This podcast has been sponsored by Think Learning. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please review it, share it and subscribe so you never miss a future episode.